Hello, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining me. My name is Evan Jarvis. I'll be your host tonight. Tonight we're going to be taking a deeper look into hand selection. Pretty excited about this presentation. I've studied up a lot over the last 2 weeks in preparation for this presentation because much like yourself, I'm a student of the game, always looking to improve. And so when there's a topic I want to know a lot about, I go in there, I go in my books, I watch my videos, I do my research, and I put all the information together. So I've learned a lot, put it in here. Hopefully you learn a lot from it as well. Yeah, we're going to be talking about hand selection, a little bit about the things to consider so you can optimize your ranges in various situations to maximize your expected value. Let's get into the action and let's get stacking. Never gets old. So first, why talk about hand selection? Excelling at No Limit Hold'em, Chapter 1. I wrote about the 6 ingredients for a winning poker game, and a heavy emphasis of that was what I first popularized back in 2008, the triple threat: position, aggression, selection. We covered position in the first webinar a couple months ago, and aggression the second webinar last month. All the replays are available on YouTube. And my approach to poker is about getting every advantage you can, and the triple threat accounts for 3 of the 5 advantages. We've talked about information advantage goes with position, skill advantage with aggression, and today we're going to be talking about card and range advantage and how it pairs with selection. If you want to learn about the stamina, physical, mental advantage, check out 5 Pillars of Peak Performance, program I did with Jonathan. And for the psychological advantage, get in touch. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. So today we're going to be going into card range advantage, and we're also going to be talking a little bit about the betting advantage because they are closely related. And if you enjoy this webinar and you want to be notified about future presentations, please follow me on Twitter at GripsedPoker. I will be doing one soon on how to prepare for the World Series of Poker, just finalizing my dates. So once again, pokercoaching.com. So far, it's been very fun working with the guys at Poker Coaching. I'm very honored to be alongside these great minds. Been watching some of the webinars from the other creators, and wow, they have just been absolutely on fire. What a wealth of knowledge that Jonathan, Alex, and Matt are bringing to the table. Strongly invite you to check out the webinars. If you haven't, the webinar replays are available on Jonathan Little's YouTube channel, and it's just an absolute goldmine. Yours free. If you've already watched them, congratulations. You are well on your way to becoming the best player you can be. Goals of today's presentation. First, we're going to talk about range construction and why thinking about it is important rather than just, flying by the seat of your pants. We're going to talk a little bit about the concept of balancing your range. Then we're going to go into when and a little on why you don't always need to be perfectly balanced. Next, we will talk about continuance frequency. Huge shout out to Ed Miller and James Sweeney for teaching me about this. Really, really cool concept. Makes a lot of sense. And as we go through the slides, you'll see why. Next, we're going to talk about kind of the best hands to continue with and the various properties of different hands. And finally, which situations lead to favoring different properties. We're going to look at the properties of the various hands and then learn how to rank them a little bit based on the situation that we're in. Combining points 5 and 6 is how we really choose the best hands. And we learn kind of the art of range construction. So first, let's talk about the benefits of optimal range construction. The first benefit is building your ranges enables you to play more hands. In the first presentation in the series, we discussed how ranges adjust as position changes. And when you understand how to build your ranges post-flop, you can do the same and play wider ranges because you'll be in more advantageous positions. Fedor Holtz talked about this in his studies, that finding out how to get the most value out of each part of your range is a major key to success at the highest levels. Next, the second benefit is that it gets you thinking about the game on a higher level. And if you want to play higher stakes or against harder competition, you're going to need to know how to think in terms of ranges and see the big picture, looking at the game from a holistic perspective and kind of zooming out a little bit. This is something I'm also currently working on personally. So I definitely don't have this perfect. I don't know many players in the world that do. There are some solvers and bots that have it pretty good, but the best thing we can do is just practice, learn, iterate, refine, and get a little bit better every day. Speaking of seeing the bigger picture, building your ranges properly ensures that each hand gets its maximum expected value, which is a lot of what we're trying to do at the poker table is maximize our EV. Some hands are best for big pots, some are for big bluffs, some are good for cheap showdowns, some are for bluff catching, and so on. By planning ahead and building out your ranges with the bigger picture in mind, you'll play each hand to the best of its ability, given the properties that it has. This makes you really hard to play against because your strategy becomes well balanced and pretty bulletproof or barrel proof. And speaking of balance, building your ranges means that you have a perfect baseline, which is that, that old theory of game theory optimal. This is kind of what it moves towards, which you don't need to play in all spots because most opponents are not playing perfect, but it's always helpful to know what perfect would be. Lastly, it's not that hard. At least that's what I hear. No Limit Hold'em only has 1,326 combination of hands, which is a lot less than, Omaha or Pineapple. And in most situations, you'll only be playing between 10 and 50% of that amount. So it's not a huge sample of things to rank and order and keep track of. If you compare that to like stock trading, where there are thousands of symbols out there to keep track of, you can see that the math of poker is much simpler and more complete. You just kind of know all the variables that you're working with, and it's just a matter of organizing them to make the most of every situation. So what exactly is range construction? Range construction is choosing which hands you'll take various strategic actions with at each point in a hand. I first learned about this in the mathematics of poker, which was absolutely awesome. And that's where I learned about complex ranges. So with the betting lead, we have betting ranges and we have checking ranges. But those ranges then split further, where we have our bet folding range, which maybe you do with your weakest bluffs, like gut shots. We have our bet calling range, which we would probably want to use our strong draws or strong hands in. And then we have our bet raising range, which includes our really nutted hands that we want to try to get as much money in the pot as quickly as possible. Same thing with checking. We check fold with our weakest hands. We tend to check call our medium strength hands and check raise both the best hands and probably some bluffs too. So we're incorporating the concept of balance. When we bet or when we raise, we don't always have it because then we'd be easy to play against, but we have some bluffs in there too, so we keep our opponents guessing. It's not hard and fast, those examples that I just gave, but that's the beauty of it, is when you plan your range, you construct your range, you say, okay, which hands would do best in my betting range, which would be checking. Maybe I can move a hand from my bet raise range to my check raise range instead to keep things a bit more balanced and protected. We'll talk about more as it goes on, but this is the nuts and bolts of it, is taking the various ranges that you're going to have and allocating your hands accordingly, both your good hands and your bad hands. Without the betting lead, it's the same story. We raise for value or as a bluff. We call for showdown or with a draw when, say, we're getting the right pot odds or the right implied odds, or as a float, which is basically, a defensive bluff where we call with not much, planning to take the pot away later because we think we're going to be getting the right odds on our bet later. And finally, folding, which would be for our worst hands. And the main key takeaway from this slide, at least for me, was that when you put a hand in one range, you can't put it in another range at the same time. So what hands you put in your betting range can't go in your checking range. And that's why really looking at all your hands and thinking about which ones are going to go where really helps to ensure that your ranges are what we call protected and balanced. Okay. So next, we're going to talk about why it's beneficial to balance your range. The mathematics of poker that we discussed in the aggression webinar says that when we bet, we offer our opponent odds, or when they bet, they offer us odds. And Your opponent's job is to play when the odds are in their favor and to pass or fold when they are not in their favor. Same with vice versa. When you balance your range, you control how often you're bluffing. So, they win versus value bet. You win. Oh, little typo. Happens sometimes. And when you do it perfectly, your opponent can't do anything to beat you. So shaping your range, the concept here is that based on the odds that you lay your opponent, if you shape your range accordingly with the right amount of value bets to bluffs, you make it harder for them to guess. And if you do it perfectly, there's no guessing. They just, whatever they do, you're giving them 2-1. They need to win a third of the time. Well, when they call, they'll win exactly a third of the time because 2 times you have it, 1 time you don't. This makes them, this concept's called like indifferent with their bluff catchers. So whatever they do, they can't beat you. If they call more than they should, your value bets get paid off more. And if they call less than they should, your bluffs benefit. So by having a balanced range, you benefit from both sides of the spectrum. If you don't do this, you're easy to play against. And I'm sure you've played against that type of player before. They always have it, so you just never pay them off. Or they never have it, so you always call them really light. And by balancing your range, you make it much harder to play against you. And so I promised we'd talk a little bit about the golden ratio. And this is what the golden ratio is. So again, it's based on the mathematics of we make a bet size, we lay odds to our opponent, and therefore there's a certain frequency at which they're supposed to call based on the odds they're getting. And they have to win a certain percentage of the time. So we balance our value to bluff ratio to ensure that we're just kind of meeting that exact mark. So example, let's say we bet full pot, lay our opponent 2-1 odds. They need to show down a winner at 33% of the time. And therefore, if we have 2 value hands and 1 bluff, they're going to win that one time we're bluffing, and they're going to lose the two-thirds of the time that we're value betting. So we just hit that exact mark. If we bet half pot and lay them 3-1, they need to win a quarter of the time. So we want to have the goods 3/4 of the time. And if we bet, an eighth of the pot, we want to have it 90% of the time. So this is a chart that's worth knowing. Only thing to note on the value to bluff ratio is that in the case of like 2/3 pot and 3/4 pot, 1.5x pot and more, I rounded up the numbers to whole numbers, because when you're choosing your combinations of hands, you can't exactly, have 2 1/3 combos. So to balance that out, I just rounded up so we have whole numbers, and you can just balance your combos accordingly. So this is a really handy chart to have when designing your ranges with the bet sizes that you choose. So this makes your opponent indifferent to calling with bluff catchers, and whenever they fold, you win the entire pot. So we looked in the previous presentations about kind of the break-even success rate for various bets. And then this, the golden ratio, is how you can allocate your hands accordingly so that even when you do get called, you're getting the best of it. Hope that one makes sense. Main thing, grab the chart, save it. It'll come in handy later. And as you practice building ranges, these things will click. They'll make more and more sense. Now, we talked about how to balance our ranges. Now, when you don't need to balance your range is when you're playing against non-optimal opponents, which is 99% of players, and probably why Ed Miller's book was called Poker's 1%, not 2 or 5%. So, how to adjust? First thing to do is categorize your opponents and their tendencies, with it being situational. Know that some people play differently on the flop, the turn, the river, when the pot is small, when the pot is big. So the more you pay attention to an opponent, the more you can kind of gauge what the risk inclination, how much they like to take on high risk situations, or risk aversion is. And then you can also gauge if they change when they're playing a big pot, if they rise to the occasion, or if they kind of cower away. And also you can adjust for when people are stuck or they're doing really well in the game. It's the more you know, the more you're going to be able to make better decisions and adjust for your opponents. So pay attention, categorize your opponents and their tendencies, and that will really pay off. Because you start with your baseline range and then you can deviate. You now have numbers that you can work with for your perfectly balanced ratio, and now you can adjust. Say if they call more than they should, then you add more value bet combos and maintain the same amount of bluffs, or keep the same amount of value hands and decrease the amount of bluffs. If they fold too much, you would add more bluff combos, or you would take away some of the value combos. Vice versa, when you're facing their aggression, if they bluff less than they should, you would fold more of your weak hand combos, your bluff catchers. And if they bluff too much, you would call with more of your bluff catchers, or potentially even raise in the case where you have a hand that can't beat a bluff, but you know they have more bluffs than they should, and therefore if you raise, you're probably going to get more folds than you need to match your break-even success rate. And so why not go ahead and raise? So this is how you can kind of adjust from that baseline range. But knowing the golden ratio is very helpful because that's something you can revert to, something you can always fall back on, something you can rely on that is kind of safe and secure. So how to add combos. This is where tools like Flopzilla, the range tools at pokercoaching.com are really fantastic for this. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way, writing by hand. I'd love to give an example, but it's very tedious and would probably take about 60 minutes to go through one hand. So it'd be a little inefficient, but yeah, maybe in some future study sessions, we'll dive deep into that. 'Cause it's a fun thing to work through. Now the question is, how much is too little or too much, right? I've thrown these things out there, too much, too little. And you're like, well, relative to what? Based on what? And that's where minimum defense frequency comes in. Here's the minimum defense frequency. It's a concept that is often misunderstood. We spoke in the aggression webinar about the thresholds for profitable bets, where if our opponent folds at a certain frequency based on the bet size we chose, we're going to make profit no matter what our cards are. And the minimum defense frequency is that other side of the equation, where if we're defending less than the minimum defense frequency, our opponent can be in those situations where they can profit just from their betting and their cards don't matter. If, however, we're meeting the minimum defense frequency, now they have to actually show up with a well-constructed range to find profit from the situation. So the idea behind this chart is that we're preventing our opponent from creating profit, or quote unquote auto profiting, by betting any two cards. Now, a couple things about this chart. Few things actually. The first is that this chart is for heads up pots. In the case where you're playing a multi-way pot, the minimum defense frequency is shared by all players in the hand. So if someone bets full pot into two opponents and the minimum defense frequency is 50%, if either opponent defends at least 25% of the time, you're meeting that minimum defense frequency. Next is that this chart assumes that both players have equally strong ranges and equal equity when continuing. If you're in a situation where your opponent's range is, stronger than yours because maybe he raised from early position and you defended the big blind, you don't have to defend as much as this minimum defense frequency. Or if you're in a situation where your range is stronger than your opponent's because you constructed your range more intelligently than they did, you can continue with more hands than the minimum defense frequency and expect to show a profit. And this is where building your ranges in an intelligent way makes all the difference. The more intelligently you build your range, the more equity you will have as the hand progresses. Whereas the less intelligently you build your range, the less equity you'll have. And so building your range effectively is a big edge that you can have. Now, that's the kind of info about this chart. And I would say don't get caught up too much in the specifics of it, because it's very theoretical and it assumes average board. It assumes equal strength ranges. It assumes an average board. Certain boards favor in position players. Certain boards favor out of position players. So this is just in the whole spectrum. If all things were equal, this is how much we should defend based on the bet size. We can then deviate from here, but it's good to know these numbers just have a baseline. The numbers I found really helpful were when facing a quarter pot bet, we want to be defending a huge percentage of our range. And this may mean that we're defending some very weak hands, but also keep in mind when your opponent bets a quarter of the pot, you don't have to win that pot very often to show profit on your call. And that's why we want to defend more and more hands. And it's about picking the best hands of the ones we defend. And also when facing an overbet, we don't have to defend that often to keep our opponent from making an automatic profit. So those are the biggest takeaways I got from this chart, but I just found it really useful to see this chart with all the numbers in front of me to be like, okay, this is about what I should shoot for on average in terms of what percentage of my range I'm continuing with. And now knowing that, it's my job to choose the best hands of the ones that I continue with. So again, it's the inverse of this familiar chart from our aggression webinar, which was the break-even success rate of the bettor without cards. And again, pot equity, the better you build your range, the less these numbers even need to be. So just building your range as well is just giving you a huge bonus, a huge rebate on everything else that you do at the poker table. Cool. So choosing the best hands to play pre-flop. I've got a little graphic showing a couple of different types of ranges. On the left, we have a linear range, and on the right, we have a polarized range. I made both these ranges using the Poker Coaching Range Creator. Really good tool. First time using it, and definitely going to be using it again in the future. So the difference between these two ranges, they're both about the same percentage of hands, about 15% of hands. And on the left, we have a linear range, which means the best hands from top to bottom is how we choose our hands. This is the type of range that we're usually going to use in a defending situation. So for example, if we're calling a river bet and showing down, or if we're rejamming pre-flop, and for the times we get called, we just want to have the hands with the highest equity, or if we're, say, 3-betting out of position and having to play the hand out of position for the rest of the hand, we want, a nice linear, strong range. Whereas on the right side, where we have the polarized range, which has those best hands, nines plus, ace jack suited plus, and the suited broadways. But then it has the hands on the bottom of the spectrum that didn't quite make the linear range. So the deuces through fours, the lower suited aces, the lower suited kings. These hands and the suited connectors, that they have some nice properties to them. The suited aces can make nut flush draws. They can make nut flushes. They also have the blockers of the ace, which decreases the chance that our opponent has an ace. The suited kings can make the king high flush. And also these hands have the ability to make top pair one way. And then our drawing hands have the ability to still make sets and straights. Now, a polarized range is used more for aggressing as opposed to defending. Because with aggressing, we can win when our opponents fold to our bet. And what did we learn last webinar? That the weakest hands, those with the least equity, benefit the most from getting their opponents to fold. So we throw these hands in here because they benefit the most from getting the opponents to fold, and we'd rather use, the ace 10 suited through ace 6 and the suited 9x and the ace 10s to call. So this is where, if we're going to have a calling range and a raising range, and we want to have some good hands in the calling range, we raise the best hands, call with the next best hands, 3-bet as a bluff with the next best hands, and then fold the worst hands. That's kind of some basics of pre-flop range construction. So when building a range, we want some value hands and some bluffs when we're playing, with the aggression, and especially if there's going to be multiple streets of betting. And this is an example of a pre-flop range with both. Now, if we were playing against an opponent who never folded, there'd be no need to include the bluffs. We would just use the linear range. Whereas if there was an opponent who folded all the time to bluffs, we may add more of the weaker hands to the mix because they'll benefit even more from just getting the opponent to fold on later streets. And we'd be better off playing them as bluffs than playing them as folds because our opponent folds too much. So that's kind of adding in an exploit and a counter in how we can construct our ranges to plan for the opportunity to take advantage of that weakness in our opponent's strategy. And it's the same post-flop, which is why opponent tendencies are so important. They affect how you should shape your range. Hope that makes sense. So choosing the best hands to play pre-flop. We have our tier 1 hands, which are our big pairs and our big suited aces, suited broadways. Tier 2 hands, which are our medium pocket pairs, suited aces, and suited connectors, suited broadways. In our tier 3 hands, we have our smaller pocket pairs, suited connectors, and offsuit broadways. And then tier 4, suited connectors, suited gappers, suited kings. Tier 5, suited 2 gappers, queens, and jacks. And the key with these hands is the properties of them. The better hands pre-flop will make better hands post-flop. And with these tier 1 hands, when they flop a set, it's going to be top set. On a lot of boards, they're going to have over pairs. And if they flop top pair, it's going to be top pair, close top pair, top kicker most of the time. If they make a flush, it's going to be the nut flush, or in worst case, the second nut flush. So these hands, when they hit the flop, they'll have the best of it on the flop, and we can play them for a big pot. Whereas the tier 2 hands, if they flop a set, it's more often mid set, not as often top set. With the suited aces, it's top pair if they flop an ace, but it's not top pair great kicker. And they do have the ability to make the nut flush draw, which is what makes them top tier hands. And the jack 10 suiteds and up can make really strong straights. And then as we go down, we have hands that can make sets, but they'll make bottom sets. Or we'll have hands that can make straights, but they won't be the nut straights, and flushes that won't be the nut flushes. So we have to be more cautious with them. We can't exactly just get all our money in when we make a 9 high flush, but we can get all our money in with an ace high flush no matter how many big blinds we have. So looking at the concept of implied odds, the top tier hands have higher implied odds, and the lower tier hands have more reverse implied odds. They can't really play big pots. And then the mid tier hands are everything in between. As for the tier 4 hands, suited kings get in here because the king can make top pair, plus they can make the second nut flush, which can be played, for a medium sized pot, but it just can't be played quite as confidently as an ace. There's a huge difference between the nuts and the second nuts. The nuts and everything else. The nuts can play for all the money at any time. The second nuts and down can't. They have to be more selective. So key properties, again, just to review, the best hands have the ability to make top pair, top set, top boat, nut flush, nut straight. Great hands have the ability to flop a set or combo draws. They won't necessarily be nut draws, but they'll be draws that have lots of equity, high chance of making the best hand versus a made hand. And then good hands have the ability to make a marginal draw or top pair that can play for some amount of money, some amount of streets of betting, but not all the streets of betting post-flop. Key questions for choosing the best hands. First, look at the math, pre-flop and post-flop, and based on that, what odds are you getting? What percentage of hands do you want to continue with? When it comes to which hands to open, Jonathan's got some great charts for that on pokercoaching.com. It's one of the resources you get as a member. And then when facing an open, that's when you look at your opponent's range. What percentage of hands is he playing? Can you exploit him post-flop? If so, you want to play more hands. Is he pretty solid post-flop? If so, you want to just play the same amount of hands as him. And based on that, you choose what percent of hands you want to continue with. Also, their post-flop tendencies really matter. How do they react to aggression? What's their fold to 3-bet, their flop raise, fold to flop raise, fold on later streets, etc. Just the more you can profile your opponent, the more you can justify widening your range and playing more hands because you know where you can, make your move on them and put the pressure on and find a profitable bet. Second is determining what hands you want to use to make up that percentage. So if you know you want to play 10% of hands, what is the best 10% of hands to play given the situation? Next, do you have to consider another range? If so, for your 10% raise range, you might not want to do the top 10% of hands. Maybe you want to do the top 7% of hands, call with 5%, and then the next 3% you raise. So if you have to consider another range, you can't just put all the best hands into one range. You want to spread them out over two to ensure that both your ranges can withstand pressure on later streets. This is called protecting your range. Fourth is, are there more cards to come? If that's the case, then having draws go up in value, having equity goes up in value, having outs goes up in value. And how deep are you? If you're really deep, then those nut draws go up in value. And if you're super deep, the draws that make you the nuts and make your opponent a strong second best hand go up in value. That's when you get really nitty gritty with the hand selection. And it's how deep are you and how likely is the money to go in the middle, because just because you have 500 big blinds in front of you, if the pot has 5 blinds in it on the turn, it's unlikely that all those 500 bigs are going in on the river. It's a 100x pot, which brings us to pot to stack ratio, which is the concept that helps us recognize what is the likelihood of a lot of money going into the pot. So to figure out pot to stack ratio, what is it? It's exactly what it sounds like. You take how much is in the pot, take how much is in the effective stack, and you create a ratio. It's another concept that Matt Affleck talked about in one of his webinars. So for example, you're playing a 1-2 no limit game. Small blind raises to 10. Big blind calls. Pot's $20. You both started the hand with 200. You have 190 behind. Your pot stack ratio, 9.5. If on the other hand, your opponent started the hand with $70, so the effective stack is 70. Once you raise 10, get called 10, the pot's 20, 60 behind. The pot stack ratio is $30. There's 3. Make sense? Great. Now the question is, why is this important? And it has to do with how we plan our hands. If you watch the position webinar, then you'll recall this graphic, which shows how the pots grow from street to street, with them getting bigger and bigger as we get later and later. And when we're going to be playing big pot on the river, we want to have a strong range to prepare for that. So this is where the pot stack ratio really comes in. It's how we plan our hands. So if the money is going to go all in on the current street, if the next bet is all in, that would be a pot stack ratio of 1, assuming a pot size bet. We want hands that can win at showdown. In other words, we want to be playing our strongest hands. Probably want to be playing that kind of linear range. If we're calling. If we're betting, I'll talk about it in 2 slides. If the pot stack ratio is 4, which means we have basically 2 pot size bets left, because the first pot bet is 1, and then when called by the opponent, there's now 3 in the middle, and the next pot size bet is 3, which gets us all in. So a pot stack ratio of 4 means that most of the money will go in on the next street. And so in that case, in addition to hands that can win at showdown, we want hands that can improve to strong hands. So think draws, lots of equity, many outs. And if the money is going to go in on a way future street, like the river, we want hands that can improve to strong hands. We want the hands that can improve to nut hands. And it gets even more pronounced as we get deeper. So with that pot stack ratio of 40, where it would now take 3 streets of betting and a raise to get all the money in, you're really going to need a cooler situation. You want to be preparing to have hands that can play a big pot on the river, where your opponent will make a second best hand. I'm trying to think. An example of that would be like, what's a good one? King 9-5 board. Yeah, if you have Jack 10 on King 9-5 and you make a straight by hitting a queen, there's a good chance your opponent's made 2 pair with King Queen, and you'll be able to get a lot of action in that spot. Whereas if you have 8-7 on that board, King 9-5, and you make your gut shot by hitting a 6, your opponent's not going to have as many combinations of 5-6 for 2 pair as they would King Queen for 2 pair. And so that's kind of, again, the nitty gritty of it, of seeing not only how many outs does your hand have, but how likely is it to win a setup on a later street. So as stacks get deeper, we want to plan for those later streets. But when stacks are shallow, we don't need to worry about those cooler situations on later streets. So depending on our pot stack ratio, different properties of hands become more important. And so here's just a quick breakdown of it again as a reminder. So first we check how many streets of betting are left. Pot stack ratio check. When the pot stack ratio is 1, we plan for right now. We want raw hand strength and showdown value. Pot stack ratio is 2 to 4. We want to plan for the next street. That's where outs and equity become important. When the pot stack ratio is 5 to 13, we want to start planning for 2 streets from now, which is where nut potential is important. And with 14 to 40 pot stack ratio, assuming pot size bets, we want to plan for 3 streets from now, where the implied odds and reverse implied odds, so really getting those setup situations, becomes important. You know, it's like really, really complex stuff, this range construction stuff. So choosing the best hands to play post flop. Here are the properties to consider for each hand. The more of these a hand has, the better. So we have absolute hand strength. That's kind of looking at your hand on a hand chart. You know, do I have trips, 2 pair, straights, flushes, flush draw, open ender, combo draw. Next we have equity, which is your chance of winning versus your opponent's range. Think outs. Easy way to do this is to throw a hand into a equity calculator, plug in their range, plug in your hand, and you'll get your equity against them. Future equity is chance of winning if the pot gets big. So instead of thinking of quantity of outs, think of the quality of the outs that you have. If I hit my out, do I have the nuts, or could I have the second best hand? If I hit my hand, is my opponent likely to make a second best hand, or are they likely to just have a marginal hand that can't give a lot of action anyway if I try to play a big pot? Next, we have backdoor potential, which is a bonus because you pick up extra equity when you have a backdoor draw. So 3 to a flush draw is better than no draw, and 3 to a straight draw is better than 3 to a gut shot in terms of bonus equity. Showdown value is your chance of winning unimproved. Vulnerability versus resiliency. How many cards can make you second best? So an example of this would be like, again, on that King 9-5 board, pocket queens versus pocket tens. Tens are more vulnerable because the jack and queen can both make a better pair hand than the tens. Whereas with queens, there's no extra outs that can make a better pair. I mean, both of them are equally vulnerable to an ace. So we'd be more inclined to bet with the tens and more inclined to check with the queens. So if your hand is vulnerable, you need more protection. That's a good reason to bet. Another example would be top pair, top kicker on 8-3 deuce versus king 3 deuce. Despite the fact that both hands are the same absolute hand strength, top pair, top kicker, the the pair of eights is much more vulnerable because there are more overcards that can come. There are more outs that their opponent can have against them. And then lastly, blockers. Do you have cards that can alter their range? Common example is if you have an ace in your hand, it's less likely your opponent has an ace in their hand. So you block the best hands, whereas if you have like a deuce in your hand, your opponent can't have a deuce, so they'll have more strong hands because they won't have twos. And these are just all the different properties that a hand can have. The more of these properties a hand has, the stronger the hand is. The less they have, the weaker the hand is. And that's kind of how we put our hands on a scale. It's not just what is my absolute hand strength. There are more factors to consider. And the more of them you consider when choosing your hands, the more effectively you can construct your ranges. And so when looking at your hands, you want to ask, do I have a value hand, semi-bluff, or a pure bluff? Because when we're talking about balancing our value range and our bluffing range, semi-bluffs are better to have than pure bluffs, and we want to have a mix of both. So here's a little way to visualize hands after the flop. First, we have our nut hands, which are hands that we're ready to play for 3 streets of value. These are our best hands. We want to go bet, bet, bet with these. And we want to pair those with our nut draws. These are the hands that have that high future equity and probably a good amount of equity as well. And we have our strong made hands, which are probably best for 2 bets. But if we bet 3 streets and really reduce our opponent's range too much, they're no longer going to be the best hand. And we pair that with our strong draws. These would be hands that have high equity, but maybe not a lot of high future equity, or hands that have, say, good showdown value, like, a pair and a draw would be something that would probably fit into a strong draw that we don't want to play for all the streets, but we are comfortable playing for a couple. Then we have our weak made hands, which we're just looking to play for 1 street, and our weak draws. And finally, our air trash, which we don't want to play any streets of betting with these hands. These are the hands that just go into our check folding range right out of the gate. And here's a little way to visualize it. We're going to have mostly, we're going to have more air hands than nut hands. And the way I approach it is on the early streets, I'm probably going to bet all the hands that are yellow and green. And then as I move to the turn, I lop off the weakest hands, the weak hands, weak draws, continue with the strong ones. And then on the river, lop off the strong ones and just continue with the nut hands and the nut draws. So the more streets of betting I'm going through, whether I'm betting or being bet into, the narrower my range gets and the stronger it gets, while still containing some draws in it as well. And so a hand is 1 with showdown value, stars are semi-bluffs, 2 stars are 2 bluffs. And yeah, because I know this goes can be a little, actually it can be very overwhelming at first, and examples can be really needed. So for more on this, I'd say check out the work of Ed Miller or James Sweeney, because they take you really deep into this with hand examples and get more nitty gritty. For this presentation, I wanted to introduce the key concepts to be considering and give you kind of the broad strokes, the overarching picture, the holistics of all the things to consider. And then for getting nitty gritty, we can work on it more specifically in the future, or you can check out those materials, which will give you examples to really have it click. How to rank hands on the river, which is a unique situation because on the river, what's different is we don't have any draws anymore. We don't have any semi-bluffs anymore. So on the previous slide, we had the full pyramid, and I mentioned how we remove hands as we move through the streets and up the pyramid. And so on the last street, we just have the top of the pyramid. We have our value bets that were our nuts the whole way. We have our draws that didn't improve. Our draws that did improve became value bets. And then we have the hands in the middle, those 2 street hands, which we have as showdown hands. And in this situation, is a time where we can now benefit from betting a polarized range. The reason being that, we looked at the golden ratio. We want our value bets and our bluffs to be aligned. And our bluffs, our hands that can't win at showdown, are the ones that benefit the most from getting our opponent to fold. Whereas our hands that can win on showdown can benefit from check calling because they can win at showdown. A good example of this is if we bet the river, whether we're value betting or bluffing, and get raised, we can continue with our value hands and we can fold with our bluffs. Easy. But if we bet a hand that has showdown value and we have to fold to a raise, we may be folding a hand that could have won the pot if it had checked. And so our checking hands are kind of the middle of our range will usually want to be checked on the river so we can show it down. And the worst hands will want to be bet because they're the ones that benefit the most from bluffing the river. The key in this situation is to look at the bet size that you're choosing and figure out how many bluffs you need to have to match that. So you see, how many value bets do I have? What bet size am I choosing? And how many bluffs do I need to balance that out? And when you combine those two things, you'll have that perfect ratio. And yeah. Okay, so value bets can beat 50% of the calling range. Bluffs will not win at showdown, and everything else is what falls between. It can beat a portion of the range, but it won't beat 50% of their calling range. Okay. Now we're going to rock through a little checklist for planning your hand versus a perfect opponent. First, ask, what does my range look like? Second, ask, how many streets do I want to play with each hand? So putting the hands into the buckets. Then third, what bet size will I be using? And based on that, how many value bets you have and what bet size you're using, you can figure out how many bluffs you need to balance your range. Then fifth, once you know kind of what frequencies you're going for, how many hands you need, how many combos you need, then you choose the best candidates to fill those ranges out. And finally, ask, is my checking range protected? You don't want to put all your good hands in your betting range because then your checking range is weak and your opponents, if they're thinking players, can take advantage of that, which a perfect opponent is. But fortunately, we're not playing against perfect opponents. We're playing against human opponents who are going to make mistakes, myself included. So in this case, checklist I go through is ask, how does my opponent play pre-flop? Because their tendencies are what's really going to dictate the best strategy for you. Do they play perfect? Do they play too loose? Do they play tight? And then look at the post-flop tendencies. On what street are they imbalanced? Do they c-bet the flop too much and then give up on the turn? Do they not bet the flop enough? Yeah. Do they bet the flop in the turn too much but give up on the river? Or do they triple barrel too much? And based on where they are imbalanced, you can build your range in such a way that you can get to that situation more often and then take advantage of it. Third is, do I need to be concerned with balance? If the answer is yes, they're playing pretty solidly, you want to balance your range. If you don't need to be concerned with balance, you can completely adjust your range by going unbalanced. So if they call too much, you can value bet more hands, or you can choose a bigger bet size to get more value when you do get called. If they call too little or fold too easily, you can include more bluffs in your range, or you can choose a smaller bet size with more of your hands since they're folding more than they should, and you can risk less for the times they actually wake up with a hand. That's number 5. Is there a better bet size to accomplish my goal? And based on that, can you build multiple ranges with multiple bet sizes to accomplish your various goals in various situations, provided your opponent is not going to adjust to that? So the less concerned your opponent is with your hand and your range, The more creative you can get with this, and the more savvy your opponent is, the more thinking your opponent is, the more you want to stick to having balanced ranges in pretty much all situations. Okay, summary. That was a lot of material. If it didn't all click, don't sweat it. Can rewatch the replay on YouTube, and also I mentioned the resources that you can use to go deeper in. And also Matt Affleck in his most recent webinar did a couple of really good hand examples on range construction, so you can actually see it in action, which I know really helps to solidify it. Just as I said, we're almost an hour without even having examples, so that would have been like 2 hours without the Q&A. So apologies if I threw a little bit too much info out there. I was just really excited about the material I was studying. I kind of wanted to put it all together and give it my best shot. So in summary, what we learned today is that building and planning your ranges allows you to play more hands and realize more expected value from each hand in the ranges. 2, makes you hard to play against. It makes it easier for you to play because you are preparing for the future situations that you're going to find yourself in. So, your ranges are protected and you have strong hands for big pots. 3, range construction is allocating your combos to different ranges and different lines, thinking about what am I betting 3 streets with? What am I betting 2 streets with? When I'm betting 2 streets, am I bet check betting? Am I bet checking? Am I check bet betting? And that will depend on pot size, type of hand, type of opponent, implied odds, etc. 4, against perfect opponents, we want to be balanced with our value to bluff ratio based on bet size. That's that golden ratio, which you can consult the chart anytime you like. 5, against imperfect opponents, we can deviate to exploit their imbalance. In his book, Poker's 1%, Ed Miller says, you want to follow these rules of having solid ranges and solid frequencies, but when someone breaks the rules, you're welcome to break them too. So if someone is not playing an optimal strategy and you recognize where that imbalance is, you can adjust your ranges and your balance of value to bluff to take advantage of it. 6, minimum defense frequency tells us how much to continue based on bet size and range versus range equity. 7, playing well pre-flop makes it easier to play well post-flop, and playing well on the flop makes it easier to play well on the river. 8, as the hand progresses, slowly let go of hands and continue appropriately based on your opponent's bet size and range. So we had that pyramid from 3 slides ago, and we talked about how as we move through the hands and we face more betting and we reduce our range and we refine our range, we lop off the weakest hands and only continue with the better hands, the prime candidates. And when facing a bigger bet size, we drop off more of the hands. And when facing a smaller bet size, we drop off fewer of the hands to meet that minimum defense frequency. 9, when shallow, think showdown value. When deep, think equity. And when super deep, think nut potential. And 10, on the river with hands. On the river, hands with no showdown value benefit the most from bluffing, and hands with showdown value should usually be put into your check and calling range. Okay. And that's my presentation on hand selection and the things to consider to help start structuring your ranges to make you really hard to play against. If you want to learn more about range construction, learn it in action, and learn from other coaches who are doing the same, pokercoaching.com. Awesome place to do it. I've been really impressed with all the webinars that have been coming out from Alex and Matt and Jonathan. And also the hand quizzes are they're so helpful for learning, because it's the closest thing you can get to playing poker without playing poker, and to be engaged in the action, to make decisions in the moment, be put under pressure to make decisions and get instant feedback on your play. Many studies say that the best way to improve at something is to get immediate feedback when you take an action. And these hand quizzes are the best way to get that feedback other than hiring a private coach, which is very expensive. So I'm a huge fan of pokercoaching.com, the hand quizzes, and the webinars, and also, the range tools that they have. Jonathan just keeps adding new stuff all the time. He's really gone out of his way to make the most complete training program out there. And when you sign up for pokercoaching.com, you'll also get access to Float the Term for free, which is a lot of extra videos. And I actually listened to a podcast from Jonathan today. That guy might be the hardest working guy in the industry. Just so much respect to him for just constant grinding, work ethic, always looking to improve, always looking to help his customers, always looking to meet the requests that are brought to him. And that's how we built up a library of 786 poker videos. Poker Coaching has a 7-day free trial. As you said in the podcast, go ahead, sign up, binge it. If you don't want to pay, cancel after 7 days. You don't mind. Odds are you're probably going to enjoy it. You're probably going to stick with it. It's just a great program.